Cardinals fans, hi, hello. It's been a minute, but I am glad to be back with you all on this Friday morning/afternoon. Life comes at you fast during the final week of spring training, as I seem to forget every year. But the good news is that in 6 short days, the 2025 season will officially be underway. And I, for one, am pretty excited about that. Cardinals opening day, Thursday, March 27th at Busch Stadium against the Minnesota Twins. Sonny Gray was named the Cards opening day starter earlier in the week. No surprise there. And he'll take on his former team and former teammate Pablo Lopez, the Twins opening day starter. 3:15 Central Time start. See you there. So disclaimer, this is a boring beat writer episode. But only because I think the looming decisions for St. Louis, they're pretty interesting, and they're most likely going to be finalized over the next couple of days. Slowly but surely, the Cardinals' opening day roster is taking shape, and we have a pretty solid idea of what the core position players will look like. We also have a pretty solid idea of what the bullpen will look like, and we mostly know the bench, which does project to be somewhat fluid. First, a little bit of some news this morning. I feel a little pretentious plugging my stuff. I don't know if I love this, but whatever. Jose Fermin has made the St. Louis Cardinals opening day roster per sources. He'll serve as the backup utility role contact bat off the bench. So he's beat out non-roster invite Jose Barrero for that spot. Cardinals hope to finalize their 26-man roster before they break camp on Sunday. Yes, they have that exhibition game in Memphis on Monday, but Ollie Marmol has said throughout the week he hopes to have his squad ready to go. The Cardinals will leave Jupiter Monday the 24th, fly into Memphis, play a quick game, and then fly that night to St. Louis. Off day on Tuesday, workout on Wednesday, and then we're going to hit the ground running. So, yeah. All right. Why Jose Fermin? Well, he's really taken some great at-bats over the last week. He's played virtually all around the diamond, and he's just had a really solid camp. And while I think him and Barrero came in pretty evenly matched, Fermin has, I think, earned it for what this roster is looking for. Barrero has done well, and he's certainly jumped on the radar of the staff. And for a while, I had him making the roster over Fermin. Again, Barrero is a non-roster invite, and that's going to cost a 40-man spot to add him there, obviously. Could the Cardinals have 60-day Zach Thompson to make room? That was certainly a possibility, but ultimately not a decision they felt like they needed to make. Why Fermin? I think the skill set, again, complements this bench a little bit more. With Fermin that you're going to get league average defense and you're going to get contact in your at-bats. Based on how the Cardinals bench is stacking up, Luke Baker from the right side, a combination of Alec Burleson and Nolan Gorman, depending who's starting from the left, and of course, whichever of Ivan Herrera and Pedro Pajes is not starting that day. Going with contact and defense here makes sense, especially with the Cardinals prioritizing offense. They feel like they have their power bats, especially with Baker. Fermin can play around the diamond. You don't need him to be a gold glove shortstop behind Mason Wynn. You just need serviceable defense, and he can get you that. So he will be on the roster. The club has not announced that officially, but they should ideally soon. All right. The two big questions over the weekend with technically four games left. Oh, 5 because of the Memphis game. The two big questions that the Cardinals need to answer: who's making the rotation and who's the center fielder? We're recording this ahead of Friday's split squad game. Sonny Gray takes on the Astros here in Jupiter in a minute, while Mike McGreevy gets to start in Port St. Lucie against the Mets. Victor Scott has the home game. Michael Ciani has the road start. My friends, the center field competition is as tight as advertised. Let's dive into here from what we're seeing from Victor Scott. So first, this is not like a bold statement by any means, but what a great camp Victor Scott has had so far. And this is the question that we've been asking pretty much since the start of spring. Is he going to make the roster? And maybe because I've covered the Cardinals for about 5 years now, and there always seems to be a scenario where there's a clear answer that makes a lot of sense, and then there's an answer that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And 99% of the time, this organization does the option that doesn't make a lot of sense. So I don't know if we're like trauma bonded or if we're just used to kind of having to look at things the other way than I think we normally should. So for a while, I was convinced that Victor Scott would not make this roster. And we talked about this on The Athletic. It just came down to how the Cardinals are looking at viewing their lineup and their position players. So for Victor Scott, who, again, has had a great spring, what the organization was weighing here was what was more important, his long-term development or short-term goals. The Cardinals are looking to center or platoon center field. We know this. We know Lars Nootbaar is going to see some reps there. We know that the organization has promised continuous at-bats to take your pick. Jordan Walker, Nolan Gorman, Alec Burleson, Brendan Donovan, Mason Wynn, go down the list. Those guys are going to play every day. Obviously, your corner guys, Contreras, Arenado, they're going to stay there too. So in order to ensure the maximum number of at-bats, especially for the lefties, so you're thinking Donnie, Gorman, and Burleson, you have to put Nootbaar in center for, I don't want to say the majority of time because the Cardinals have not said that, nor do I think that's their plan, but a good amount of time you'll see Nootbaar in center. So does that make sense for, even if it's a 75-25 platoon, does it make sense for Victor Scott to ride the bench for some of those games where he could be playing every day in Memphis? I guess his play this spring has ultimately forced that question to be answered, because I no longer think that that's going to be the issue. I think Victor Scott has played his way and deserves to be on the opening day roster. The Cardinals have not made a decision over him or Siani yet, but I'm sensing a vibe change. In my last roster projection for The Athletic, I wrote Scott would not make the roster and Siani would. I'm changing my mind. If I had to write another roster projection today, I would put Siani in AAA and Victor Scott on the roster. But again, this is a conversation that the Cardinals are continuing to have, and it will probably not be finalized until Sunday. But let's look at how this would work if Victor Scott II is on the roster. I think, should the Cardinals line up the way that I think that they do against Pablo Lopez on Thursday, you're going to have Mason Wynn leading off shortstop. Then I'm not quite sure where they're going to slot the lefties, but my gut feeling tells me Lars Nootbaar will hit second. He'll play left. Then you got Contreras at first, Arenado at third. I like Herrera in the 5-hole, but with the lefty-righty split, I can see Donnie going there. Then Herrera 6. Donovan's at second base, by the way. This is my prediction. Herrera catching, Gorman the DH, Walker 8th right field, and then Victor Scott the second, batting 9th, playing center field. Obviously, Sonny Gray takes the hill. That's my prediction, and that's what I think the Cardinals' most frequent lineup will be to start the season. We talked to Ollie Marmol a lot this week about how he envisions running the lineup, whether we'll see a platoon with the catchers, how he's going to mix in at bats. And I asked him, in years prior, you were not afraid to shake up the everyday lineup. There was a pretty heavy lefty-righty platoon. There was, a clear lineup you could expect against lefty starters and righty starters. But there was also, like we saw in 2023, too much mixing and matching did not bode well for consistent success. So how is he going to balance that, along with ensuring all the at-bats that he promised to others? He said there are benefits to guys showing up and knowing where they're playing and hitting in the lineup every day. But there are also advantages to platooning and mixing and matching to optimize your lineup based on who you're facing. I don't think you have to fully commit to one or the other. And I don't think the Cardinals are going to fully commit to one or the other when it comes to the catching situation. I think you're going to see a pretty heavy mix of Herrera and Pedro Pagés. But I do think that to start, Herrera is going to get the nod because of the big emphasis on offense. So if you're going to emphasize offense in most of the positions, Victor Scott will be just fine if he hits the ball like he did this spring. I think his average is up to 373. He has an OPS over 1,100, slugged 2 homers, one on Monday, one on Wednesday. I think I've said this before, if this was a performance-based camp, we wouldn't be talking about it. The weight of the development for him is still a key here. But personally, I don't know how the Cardinals cannot take him after this spring. I don't know what kind of message that would be sending to him. He has been working out in Jupiter since November, came down here, has been with John Jay every single day. I'm going right here, Friday, March 21st. I think Victor Scott makes the roster. So we'll see. Lots of other roster things to discuss over the week. It's kind of been a crazy back and forth week, such as the nature when the big final decisions come. So we'll get into that. But first, let me actually make sure I read the sponsor right. Here is a message from Arena Club.
FT fam, Arena Club is the modern way to collect cards or buy or sell or trade or even grade. And we're highlighting slab packs because this is the new way to rip open a pack and get a really good card, AJ. But also, if you're not into the card, like I know you pulled a Bob Gibson card recently, you can get an offer of 90% of the estimated value and just accept it on the spot and give it right back and maybe try again with another slab pack.
I ain't getting rid of my Bob Gibson autograph card. Bob Gibson ain't signing cards anytime soon, so I'm keeping this one. It gets graded for you. There's no mess. The only thing I wish they had bubble gum. Can they virtually send me some bubble gum, Scott. Other than that, it's awesome. You can buy, sell cards. They grade them instantly for you. And physically, you can also get the cards if you want them. So I'm all for this. This is one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
Yeah, those cards are in your showroom in the app. And then, of course, you can get the card physically sent to you. So right now, you can get 20% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/FOUL. That's arenaclub.com/FOUL. Code FOUL for 20% off your first purchase.
Okay, so more roster decisions. The most pressing question outside of center field is if the Cardinals will utilize a 6-man rotation to enter the year. This was floated to us by Ollie on Monday. Still kind of no clarity on what that looks like. As much, I'm a Mike McGreevy truther. As we know, there are many players that I'm in on. Jordan Walker, Mike McGreevy's on there. And if this was a club based on performance, he should be in the starting rotation. This is one of those situations, though, where I think even more so than the Victor Scott situation, outside circumstances are really going to matter in the decision here. So the Cardinals, 6-man rotation. Let's go with the ones that we know are going to be in there. Sonny Gray, Eric Fetty, Miles Michaelis. Those are probably your 3 starters against the Twins next week, which, it's so fun to talk about series that are going to matter. I just get excited thinking about it. If the pitching schedule stays on track, which it looks like it will, those 3 will be in there. Andre Palante has not shown or not pitched in a Grapefruit League game in about a week or so, but he's been working on the backfield, staying on track. It's a weird kind of schedule for the back end guys. I expect him to be in the rotation. No decisions have been made there yet. I think what the Cardinals are weighing here is how best to use Matthew Liberatore. And that kind of hinges on if they're going to use a 6-man rotation to start the year or not. Matthew Liberatore, I think, has been the most impressive pitcher across the board in Cardinals camp this year. He has looked nasty. They brought him up as a starter or stretched him out as a starter because, one, it's much easier to cut innings down than ramp them up, obviously. But 2, they realized last spring, and this is something Livy realized as well, when he stretches out as a starter, he just gets better command, better feel, better reps. And obviously think about how many innings you're throwing as a starter compared to a reliever. He felt even if he was coming in as a reliever, as a multi-inning guy, that coming out as a starter allowed him to get his stuff right quicker and more effectively. And we're certainly seeing that it's been a great camp for Livy. What the Cardinals are weighing here is he best served as a starter, or can he repeat that success? And he looked really good in the second half of last year as that long man, swing man in relief kind of situation. Steven Matz has had a really good spring as well. How ironic that him and Miles Michaelis have by far been the best looking starters in the Grapefruit League for the Cardinals. And I think if Matz was faltering a little bit or didn't look as strong or as healthy as he does, that there would maybe be more of a conversation internally of flipping Livy and Matz. So Matz would be in the bullpen, Livy to start. But because Matz has looked so effective, it's really kind of thrown a wrench in what is best to do for this rotation. Here's why I'm not super into a 6-man rotation. And I promise I'm going to get into why McGreevy factors in here. Just it's a long-winded explanation. This is where my mind is at. I think I've lived the last 50 days. I felt exactly the same. So bear with me. So now I already lost my train of thought. What are we talking about? Livy. Okay. With the Cardinals specifically, they opened the season with 3 off days in their first 15 games. So it doesn't really necessarily bode well for a 6-man rotation schedule. I mean, there were times, I think 2 seasons ago, where the St. Louis opened up with 4 consecutive road trips on the West Coast and everyone was exhausted. That would have made sense for a 6-man rotation to start the year. I'm not sure if that makes a lot of sense in terms of making sure guys are on their regular schedule, getting enough reps. Sure, a little bit of extra rest in April, early April was probably a good thing. But I'm not sure if it's the best, if it's set up the best to utilize a 6-man rotation. I also think that no matter which 6 pitchers are going to be in there, Michael McGreevy is unfortunately going to be the odd man out. You look at the pitching depth in Memphis, and this is also kind of what's factoring into with Livy. There are not a lot of options. When Drew Rom went down in the beginning of spring, he was not on the roster, but he was certainly being, or on the 40-man, I should say, he was certainly being looked like as a depth option, though. Didn't chance. Same thing with Zach Thompson a couple weeks later. He went down with a latch strain, and no, he was not really necessarily competing for a spot on the opening day roster, but he was supposed to pack some depth that the Cardinals were counting on if needed in AAA. With those 2 down, making sure that you have ample starting pitching stretched out in Memphis matters the most here. And without someone like Michael McGreevy in AAA, the second a starter gets hurt, who do you have down there right now, if you're St. Louis, that you feel comfortable, ready to go? Gordon Graceffa was optioned last week. He'll be stretched back out as a starter, but that's going to take some time to ramp back up because he's only been pitching in 2 consecutive innings, hasn't really gotten to 3 yet. It's going to take some time. Summer Bursa is there if you need it, but there's no the Cardinals aren't going to rush up Quinn Matthews if he's not ready. There's no reason to do that. They're not going to rush up Tink Hence. Tekoa Roby has looked great this spring. He's someone I'm keeping an eye on, but he hasn't pitched more than 40 innings in 2 years, so they're certainly not going to rush him up either. McGreevy has performed well enough to break camp. He is a 2021 first-round draft pick out of college. Rarely do you see first-round draft picks out of college take 4 years to get to the majors. If you're basing off what he's done this spring and last year, again, he deserves it. But the depth of the organization is going to matter more here than I think performance. So I think McGreevy's out of that 6-man look, and the Cardinals will continue to contemplate what that means for the 6 pitchers we already talked about. On the other side of the pitching picture, the bullpen seems to be pretty set. Let's just go off the top of the head. The obvious ones that we know: Ryan Helsley, he's back to close. Phil Maton should get into a Grapefruit League game in the next couple of days. He's thrown on the backfield. He looks fine. The Cardinals were not necessarily worried about him ramping up. Neither was he. He's been in the league for about 9 years. I think you trust him and take his word on if he's going to be ready, and it certainly looks like it. Maton's going to have a little bit of a versatile role here. I think he's best suited as the setup man behind Ryan Helsley from the right side, but he also has an ability to go multiples. He can pitch back-to-backs. He can pretty much do everything. It's 4 consecutive years where he has appeared in at least 65 games, and that was a trait the Cardinals really coveted, that veteran experience and durability. Have you heard those phrases before with this organization? From the left side, Jojo Romero, he's looked dominant this spring. Same Jojo. The key for Jojo will be staying consistent. He was stellar in the first half, had a sub-3 ERA over less than 50 games. And in the second half, it looked like he had run out of steam. His ERA ballooned in the second half to over 5, and he only appeared in 22 games there. So that will be the key for Jojo this year, is just making sure he can remain consistent. And if he can, Cardinals will be fine. Ryan Fernandez is also an option from the right side as well. John King, same role as last year. And then I think it's going to come down to Kyle Leahy and Chris Roycroft both making the opening day roster for the first time. And those guys, Chris Roycroft has looked like a completely different pitcher. He looks confident. He looks effective. I mean, we were joking around like, okay, he needs to let someone on or walk a batter or something so we can see how he can pitch himself out of traffic, because he really hasn't had to do that yet. And then Kyle Leahy has really impressed the pitching staff this spring. It's because he can do so many things. He is not overly splitty. He has a pitch for righties. He has a pitch for lefties. He can pitch multiples. He can pitch back-to-back. So you have another less experienced version of a Phil Maton, but certainly someone the Cardinals want to see more of. This goes into the youth movement thing, if you will, which I'm still not sure is an actual thing, but we'll find out. And that bullpen, given how good it was last year, it really matters that it can repeat that same success, and I think that it will. The one area of the Cardinals roster that I don't have a ton of concerns about is the bullpen. So in about a month, when the bullpen's terrible, come back to this episode and tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about, because that will probably happen. Last thing, bench roles. Who does what? I got to wrap this up because we got a game to get to. The bench is going to be fluid. We know this. I say Alec Burleson as the left-handed bench off the bat, knowing that he's still going to get consistent at bats. But for the sake of like how the opening day lineup is going to look, we'll slot Burleson in there as the lefty bench bat, but he's going to play almost every day. Lucan Baker has all but ensured himself a spot on the roster. Fantastic spring. The Cardinals did not have a right-handed bat pretty much off the bench all of last season, and it really plagued them, made it so easy for opposing managers to game plan against Ollie Marmol, really put him in an unfair position, if I'm being honest. So Lucan Baker's got that power, that slug from the right-handed side. That's cool to see. We talked about Fermin, and then, of course, whatever the bench looks like with the catcher, I mean, I think that's going to vary depending on matchup. I don't see, even though this is probably the best overall lineup, I don't see an everyday lineup where Herrera and Pajas are both in there at the same time. It's just too hard to switch out. You know, if you have a catcher get hurt, God forbid, then what does that bench look like? It's really slim. Brendan Donovan can do it all, but I don't think the Cardinals want him back there as an emergency catcher. And yeah, sure, they have Wilson Contreras, but that's not something that they want to do. So Guys, we're getting close. We're getting closer and closer to seeing how this roster is going to look. I know what I'll be watching. It will be the 6-man rotation discussion, and it will be the center field battle. But yeah, well, we should have some clarity over the next couple of days. We should also have some more news with this podcast here at Cardinal Territory. We're doing like a rebrand of sorts, and it sounds scary, but it's actually going to be really fun. So I'm looking forward to having more fun announcements about the cadence of the show, special guests we're going to get on, and just kind of the rebrand before the regular season. We knew this was a trial and error podcast, but I think now that this is our 25th episode, I think we are figuring things out. So yes, short but sweet today. We're going to have a lot to talk about over the next few days. And then before you know it, we're going to be talking about baseball. That matters. So fire me up. We'll be back probably before we break camp one more time to talk about those pending roster decisions. Until then, I'm Katie Wu. Thanks for tuning in. We will talk soon.